Center for Reinvention, and she is a management consultant who helps individuals and teams become exceptionally good at anticipating, designing, and implementing change. Adelia, welcome to the show.
So happy to be here. Thank you, Megan. Thank you, Sinead. Thank you, Crispin, for this opportunity to chat. It's very good. Thank you.
Absolutely. It's great to connect with you. So I'm going to dive right in. Your work, Adelia, centers a lot around reinvention, around change. So can you tell me, what does reinvention mean to you? Obviously, we live in times that are changing constantly, and reinvention is maybe a word that scares some of us. Maybe it excites others. So what does reinvention mean to you? What's it all about?
It is it's quite a weird one, because lots of us understand innovation, but we're not going to go into that little space right now. Just to say that for me, a reinvention is really very much about how agile you are, or how adaptable you are to change that is happening around you, and then change that is sitting over there, you know, just over there, not too far off.
Yeah, that's amazing. Yeah. And reinvention is a really interesting one, because I think in careers and in life, we kind of have periods where we do reinvent and where we change periodically. And that brings me to the question of your own personal leadership journey. And leading change is one thing, to lead others through change, but often it comes from a place of having led yourself through some major changes. So can you take me through your own leadership journey, and how did you find yourself in the kind of coaching space and in that space of helping others deal with change?
Very interesting question, because I think every leader, when you ask that question, starts off with, actually, how did I get here? Unless, of course, that was the path that you chose. For me, it really was a combination of, as I mentioned to you the other night, Megan, this conversation that you have with yourself as a young person or a younger person, looking at what is going on around you and going, hey, man, that is not what I want for my life. So it's a combination of that, and then having had, or in my case, really privileged, if I look back at the amount of, or the quality of the inputs that I had in my life. So high school, for example, I loved it. And I would go back in a heartbeat. But when you're going through those times, it's everything that you don't want at the time. But now, in a little bit of reflection, you go, wow, you were actually very, very lucky to have been placed, in a place so early in your life where the inputs were not necessarily understood back then. But now you go, oh, okay, this is why I'm like that. Or this is why I'm able to cope, because you do look around and you wonder, you know, I don't have the best coping skills. We all have ups and downs. But if I do compare myself to even some of my closest people and friends, I do feel that if I didn't have any of that so early on in my life, I might not have been capable of riding the waves of change so easily. And mind you, I say the word easily, but I don't really mean it. I just mean quickly. Because it's always difficult. It's always difficult, but there's this something between, let's say, difficulty and speed that you have to almost balance. And it's a day in, day out job. It's a minute by minute job. It's a choice by choice job.
Yeah, I read the other day that the definition of resilience is the ability to bounce back quickly after turbulence. So it's like you say, there's definitely something to the speed of that. And we definitely find ourselves having to reinvent through those times of difficulty and through those times of change. And it's really a particular skill set, that's for sure. And part of that is mindset. That's an absolutely huge piece of how we bounce back quickly from challenge. And that's something you mentioned that you are interested in, that you love speaking about, that you really live out in your life, is the idea of bouncebackability. And I was wondering if you could help me understand that. What is bouncebackability? Why is it important? And why do we need that in our lives, you know, when we're living in these incredibly uncertain times?
Yes. So bouncebackability is something that comes to mind for me, particularly when something is looking like it's going to be really difficult, or let's say you're in a space or a moment of turmoil, or you're on the other side of it. There's always that question around, you know, is this what it's supposed to be like for me? Or, you know, what is on the other side of this discomfort? So it's really being mindful, if you like, about, you know, what is going on, and not attaching yourself to that which is happening to you, but trying to just sit back and let the emotions and let this heavy stuff have its way with you, but then try and understand, well, for me anyway, what am I supposed to be learning here? And when it goes really bad, then it's a case of, man, I'm not understanding what's happening with me right now, but I think that sometime in the future, what's going on for me now is going to stand me in good stead, probably like a bit of a training ground. So again, let it happen. You can't stop bad things from happening.
Yeah.
You can reduce bounce back ability, but it's not what you want. But you can increase that by practicing daily. I always say life is like, it's like a day. I mean, I don't know how many days you have where you look and you reflect and you go, geez, man, that looks like my life. I had an entire life in a day. It feels like that these days. So yeah, there is opportunity to practice the bounce back ability thing quite often. And it's the bounce back ability for me is the question of, okay, so this is happening. And what am I going to do about it? Am I going to remain here buried, or am I going to ask somebody who knows a bit more about this and can guide me? Or am I going just to deal with it and, or not deal with it, but accept that it's happening and do something with it later on when I know? I'm not sure if that's a really good thing, because I'm very good at switching off. And I'm not sure that's part of, I don't know if that's a positive coping mechanism. I always say, let the emotion have its way with you, Adelia, and you can figure this stuff out later. But in the meantime, don't let everything else crash.
Yeah. You touched on taking action to kind of get yourself out of those difficult times, and also a little bit on the emotional aspect of it. And if I think of my own life when I've gone through times of change, or even if I think of hearing others speak about the times of change they've been through, I don't know if you'd agree, but it's almost always the emotional aspect that's so difficult to kind of work through and to sit with. You mentioned really sitting with the uncertainty of not knowing what's on the other side of an uncomfortable experience. And for me, at least, that's a huge barrier to really rolling with change easily. So how would you recommend that people deal with that kind of mindset of resistance that they experience? How would you recommend people kind of learn to sit with that discomfort, even when they don't know what's on the other side of that discomfort?
So that's a really lovely question, because somebody very wise, who happened to be my coach a few times in my life, said to me, well, it actually not just to me, it was in a group exercise where, and this thing just stays with me like right now. I was able to access it within seconds of you asking the question. So there was this exercise where we were two people facing each other, and the facilitator kept saying, go closer to each other, until there was like this much, if you can see, that much space between the two of us. And that's a very, very uncomfortable situation that you find yourself in when it's a coworker. And you didn't get to pick your partner. And so the message there, or the lesson there was, when you're experiencing discomfort, you can do a number of things. You can move forward, you can move backward, you can move sideways, or you can make no movement at all. Each one of them has a consequence. So it's looking at which set of consequences am I going to be okay with? Which is the better set of consequences? Like I say, lots of things in life is very hard from day to day. But what hard are you prepared to accept and to work through? Yeah,
that's powerful. Yeah, I'm hearing you say a lot of stuff that sounds to me like self-coaching, which I think every good coach knows how to coach themselves, right? Because we can't do to others what we don't understand and haven't been through ourselves. And it sounds like that's a really key part of becoming someone who leverages their own bounce back ability, is learning to coach yourself through things. And at least for myself, I found a huge barrier again to coaching myself through difficulty is the narratives that run in my head. And I like what you just touched on too, that sort of idea of questioning yourself and presenting yourself with options. Stay still, do nothing, move forward, move back. Those are your options, and you got to choose. That's sort of like a little narrative check where you ask yourself, am I the kind of person who wants to move forward, move back, or stay the same? Yes. So how can we sort of leverage that narrative and that sort of storytelling practice that we go through in our own heads to ensure that we're the kinds of people who are telling ourselves useful stories, positive stories that help us to cope in life? Because like you say, stuff is hard, and we can use all the tools we've got at our disposal.
Very interesting. So I don't know if you have the same thing or the same set of circumstances, but when things are difficult for me, particularly decision making, then I have, I don't know, at least 13 voices going, 13 different
Absolutely.
narratives going.
Yeah,
And
like
it's very difficult. Yeah.
That just shouts. Yeah, it gets a little noisy out there.
So, yeah, it's when you've got, or when I've got all of that stuff, all of those scenarios going off for me, it's my personal cue to go, oh gosh, just stop the music, just stop, listen to each one, because each voice is your own. It's your own set of curiosities. It's your own is going to serve you. And if you can't figure out the stuff on your own, because you mentioned self-coaching, I've never really viewed myself as self-coaching in those moments. For me, I just feel like, oh my goodness, this stuff is crazy difficult. So go to somebody that you trust, I would imagine, or if it's a particular leadership issue, ask somebody that you know is going to be quite generous with his or her time and help you through that. But I'm an overthinker, Megan. So absolutely. That kind of, what you call this, multiple narratives, it's like a normal thing for me.
Yeah. Yeah. How have you coped with that in your own life and your own leadership journey? Because you're someone who has achieved so many incredible things. How do you move forward when you have that narrative kind of closing in on you and all those voices questioning you? How have you been able to overcome that and still move forward and kind of live a life that you're proud of?
Yeah, shucks. I can think of a number of times when I wasn't successful at that at all. And then I park it and I pick it up later. I also learned this thing about having a parking lot, but this is a meeting facilitation tool. But I've adopted it. I've just grabbed it and made it something that I have here, like a virtual parking lot. So if it's too much to handle, it means you're not equipped to handle it right now, and that's okay. You don't have to sort everything out right now. You don't have to have all the answers right now. Yeah, you don't.
That's incredible. Yeah, it's so important to kind of give yourself that space. I feel like there's so much pressure sometimes to, have it all figured out, know what's coming, 1 step, 2 steps, 10 steps down the road. But that really is just sometimes just an unrealistic expectation of our powers of anticipation. I mean, if the last couple of years have taught us anything, it's that our power to see down the road really isn't as good as we think.
Sometimes, Megan, I think I'm a little bit of a cheat, if you like. Yeah. I'll tell you what, you mentioned the reinvention course, or let's just, maybe you didn't mention the course, but the reinvention practitioner program. The book, I think it's called the Chief Reinvention Handbook. It's a few different tools from a few different people who are probably classified as gurus in business. And that makes up this one handbook for us who practice or use this in our work. I do the same thing in my life. It's copy and paste. So if the thing works, in a particular setting, I'm always very curious about how this would work in my life. So when I say cheat, I particularly mean that thing worked in, let's say, whether it was work or home or in a social setting, whatever it may be. And if I apply that in my life, or let's see how that goes down for me. So there's this link between what you do for work and what you do in your life. It's a common thread. And sometimes you might hate your job, but you're there for a reason. So what are the good things? Somebody said to me one time, things might come flying at you, all the negative things, but there are gems somewhere in there. You just got to pick them out. And I suppose you need a quiet moment for that, because you always have negative things coming at you, whether it's in the news or whether it's a result or a set of KPIs that you didn't reach, or somebody's made a decision that suddenly you've got to cope with. But in that, or in your going, look for the gems, because they're there.
Yeah, absolutely. When you look back on your own leadership journey and some of the difficult things that you've had to overcome, in your life, whether it's in life or work, because those often intersect, what are some of the gems that you have drawn out that if you could go back and you could speak to, the version of yourself 10 or 15 years ago, what are those gems that you've discovered now that you would go back and you would pass on?
What are some of the gems that I have?
that you've kind of gleaned over the years in your own leadership journey as you've come to, be acquainted with the tools of reinvention and these ideas around navigating change? What would you go back and share with us?
Yes, interesting. So for I'll mention the school part of my life, or the high school part of even the primary school. I remember dialogue used to be dialogue, and what's the other one that we have at school? Debate. I never thought myself much of a debater, but it was a big not a subject, it was a topic or an extramural that you took. Again, it's one of those things that I didn't quite understand then. It's something that you sign up for, and you hope that this is going to serve you one day. But debating a topic doesn't always mean having that intellectual conversation. It's what brings me to where I am today, in terms of believing that having conversations with people without having an expectation, without wanting an answer or an outcome, is where you find untapped wisdom, untold wisdom.
Absolutely.
And so when I'm not reading a book or not doing anything that I consider leisure time, I'm inclined to go and visit, like I did on Sunday, a good friend's, because her dad's 87. I'm like, man, I don't know what I'm going to get from this conversation today, but he's in a good space. He might play his guitar. He's going to share stories with us. And it's amazing how those moments and those times actually do bring you a lot of gold, if you like. So that's the one thing. It's have conversations. I know it's a difficult thing for a lot of people to do, because you always feel like you need to sound a certain way when you're asking a question. You need to have some answers. You need to sound wise. I've also trained myself to be okay with the fact that I don't need to have any answers. I don't need to sound knowledgeable about a topic if I want to have a conversation. It's okay to say, Crispin, this is not the truth, but we haven't met. But somebody tells me that this is something that you like speaking about, or you like getting involved in. I'm curious. So that's one thing. Start your sentence with "I'm curious," and it changes everything in the room. Changes the energy. And then coaching played a very big part of my life. I was very lucky, as I mentioned, to have teachers who coached. I didn't realize it then. But if you look back now, there's still a few of them who are still there. And if I look at how they, what their approach is to teaching, it hasn't changed. So I look back, I did this little thing, it's a little piece of research. I went through Facebook to go see, like, what are my friends doing? What are my peers doing? I'm not necessarily interested in what industry you're in and what position you hold. It's just, how are you doing? And the thread is the same. We're not supposed to be okay, but we are okay. And then you look back and you go, okay, that's the impact of coaching. And then somewhere around 2011, yes, at 2009, that's the right date, I started my first job as a manager of a team of people in an industry that I hadn't worked in before. And it was in the public healthcare sector. Wow. And the topic was cancer. And I just came from South African breweries. So can you imagine?
Yeah, it's totally different.
It's massive jump from FMCG, volume-driven sales, and then you go into this crazy space, and the people who are receiving you are going, what are you doing here? How can you come across? So massive resistance, but that's not necessarily the topic. Moving over to a space like that, you do have to have a coach at those particular moments in your life, because the change, you can go in there guns blazing, you can make changes, you can do things, but then you forget that with each, I don't want to say level, because that creates the idea that leadership is an upward ladder thing. It's not like that for me at all. But when your scenario changes, then you need to, even if you don't think that you need a coach just to help you navigate with those things that happen in your head. Those voices, and you get the good ones, but you also get the bad ones. I mentioned the other day, the saboteurs, the ones that I've named Ralph. Also, one exercise that I also had to go through. I was in Tukai in the forest, and I literally had to pick up a piece of, I think it was a piece of just bark of a tree, and I was given a koki, and I needed to write down some of my own saboteurs and then name this thing. I named it Ralph because there's a character in this book titled "We're all human and work doesn't have to suck." So Ralph is a character in this book.
Okay.
And yeah, it was the easiest thing I could find for a name.
Yeah.
Because I didn't want to name, it's very difficult to name a saboteur, because then you go, the next time I see a Ralph, I'm going to have this weird impression of this person. So I had to bury Ralph, literally bury Ralph under a rock, under sand. So be mindful of those narratives, be mindful of the voices, just recognize them. You don't have to have a complete meltdown, you know, when you have the negative voice. It's like, hey, okay, I hear you, but I also don't want to hear you right now.
Yeah, I don't need you right now. This is not serving.
Yeah, thanks so much.
You've mentioned how coaching has played such an important role in your life at all these different points of change. And also how your teachers back in school really coached you, even when you didn't realize that that's what they were doing. If you look back at the coaches who have really played a pivotal role in your development, what are some of the characteristics that are sort of across the board, universal amongst them, that make a good coach? If someone is listening tonight and they're wanting to find a coach, what do you look for in a good coach? How do you know that you're investing in a helpful relationship?
Well, I don't really know how you go and pick a coach. I can only tell you that I've had good coaches. And for me, and I suppose not just for me, but for everybody, you're going to find perhaps a coach where you know things are not working out for you. Just be honest and say, this relationship isn't working for me. Because unless you knew the 4 or the 5 coaching styles, you wouldn't be able to say, hey, what's your style?
Yeah.
You might work for me. It's a matter of being okay to experiment with different coaches. Ask a couple of people who know you quite well, you know, do you think the style of coaching or this person's coaching style or whatever would work for me? Better still if the person you're asking has been coached by that person. But for me, what works really well is when you ask me what it is I want from this coaching session. Let me think it all up, because I promise you we all have the answers. And somebody who lets me run with whatever it is that I came up with. And it's, you know, that speaks to the overthinking. You have the answers, you just need to silence some of the voices. And if you have a coach, or for myself, that is able to, that knows that about me, it works.
Yeah, that's powerful. And I guess too, just having that person in your life that plays that supportive role, that's kind of on your side, and they communicate to you that you do have what it takes, you do have the answers. You just have to kind of let them come out from within.
I will admit that my first few times with the coach was very strange, because I remember speaking about, I think the topic of resilience came up from the coach's side. And he said, you don't have to tell me, but it does sound, like, I'm not quoting him verbatim, but it was something like this. It sounds like you must have been through something rough, or a few rough things in your life, you know, because this resilience stuff is showing through. I was completely freaked out. I was like, how does this guy know this? What does he know? Who does he know? Why does he know this about me? And he never mentioned any one of those things that could particularly have gone wrong in my life. I knew it. He just picked it up in terms, probably from the way the resilience stuff was showing through for him. And mind you, at the time, I didn't believe myself to have any level of resilience. It was just, this was my life. I've just become accustomed to, not to say bouncing back, but dealing with this stuff, you know, finding yourself on the other side of it. I didn't have terminologies. I didn't have coaching language, none of those things. It was just, girl, if you're going to survive, then this is what you're going to have to do. You're just going to have to.
That's interesting that you mentioned you would never have viewed yourself as someone who's resilient. Do you feel that view of yourself has changed at all?
Definitely. I know for sure that I'm resilient, and I know what works for me in terms of mechanisms or frameworks or things like that, because it's probably 12 or 13 years of coaching at various periods of my life. So I know now, but when I was younger, you didn't see yourself as anything other than your name and whatever's going on around you. You know, we were talking about today, earlier on in a different setting, about setting visions for organizations. And somebody mentioned having a client in the education space. And this was a school. And I think it was probably the principal who wanted something along the lines of, we create excellent learners, you know, something like that. And I go, oh no, maybe that's what you want, principal. But as a girl or as a young person, you don't want to be excellent, because when you're being excellent, you're standing out. You know, you don't want to stand out. You just want to know that you're doing the most. Your parents are happy, your teachers are happy, but you try very hard to stay sort of over here.
Yeah, I think it's called tall poppy syndrome.
Tall poppy, yeah, you really don't aim for that as a young person, but maybe that's just my experience.
Yeah, it's interesting how we kind of, when we're younger, I guess it's a sort of a fear of really stepping into that full potential out of fear of what others will think when we sort of pursue that. No one wants to come across as sort of, you know, a big shot who, you know, thinks they're all that. But there really is something to be said for developing that confidence over the years and kind of finding your stride. And that kind of brings me to a question around the month that we find ourselves in. We're in Women's Month here in South Africa. And you speak about kind of that narrative changing as you kind of gain confidence and started to view yourself as resilient and as capable. And I'm wondering if you can speak to the narrative that women tend to play, women in leadership, women in business, the narrative that we sometimes play in our heads of anticipating that we will be treated differently because of our sex, and anticipating those kinds of barriers in the workplace. How do we work with that kind of narrative as women?
So gratitude is the big thing for me. So when I say things, it's not, I hope it doesn't land as a kind of arrogance, but that's a narrative that I don't have. And if I think back again, well, let's say the negative things. When I left school and when I, you know, in jobs, out of jobs, that kind of thing, I always believed myself to be very, very capable of doing something. Otherwise, I wouldn't start it. And it's not so much that I was capable, but I needed to speak it into existence, you know, quite literally. So otherwise, I always say nobody else is going to tell you in enough words in a way that you're going to believe it unless you tell it to yourself. And so the kind of narratives that do also, I come from an all-girls school. So when we left there, we believed that, you know, we were geared for this life. We didn't leave there. I never left there feeling like I was going to be suffering any kind of bias. I believe that the world was just waiting for us to exit the school and do amazing things because that's what they taught you. So the kind of narratives that we all have them. I'm not saying I don't have, but I like to use a little analogy of when you get dressed in the morning, you know, you're going to take out your outfits. And the last thing you put on, whether it's your top jacket or call it what you like, this thing, I suppose. And this comes from, was it David in his Technicolor, the Joseph or David in his Technicolor Dreams? Joseph.
Yeah.
Is it? Okay. So in Standard 5, it was one of the plays that we did.
Yes, the play. Yeah.
It was a big thing, yeah. So I always think, I look at the jackets and I go like, what are you wearing today? In other words, what is that thing that you're telling yourself today? And sometimes if you practice mindfulness, it's a question. Other times it's going to be something that's going to really get you down because you're not aware of it. So when you get into workplace, particularly, well, you know, most workplaces, a lot of them still are very much sort of male-dominated spaces when it comes to the leadership levels. And if you're going to go in there each day telling yourself that you're lesser than, or you're not going to be respected because, or somebody's not going to take a work instruction from you because you're not a man, you don't sound like, you don't look like. And it's not wanting to look like a man, but it's leading with the male persona, if you like. It's not necessary. You know, I think sometimes we tell ourselves as women that this is what needs to happen for people to be able to actually follow me and for me to have the least resistance. It's quite the opposite. You know, just lead from your own personal set of strengths. And here's the other thing. A lot of people are very scared to be friendly, to be kind, to laugh in their engagement with people every day, because there's the misperception that if I'm friendly with you, I'm not going to be able to move away from that. If I need you to do something, I need to get firm or stern with you. It's not the truth. It's absolutely not the truth. Yeah. So be careful of what jacket you're putting on, you know, in the morning.
Powerful analogy. Powerful analogy.
Because you're literally going to stay with that jacket the whole day and possibly for the rest of your career. and the rest of your path, and you would have wasted so much valuable time telling yourself that this is wrong about me, this is wrong about me, people won't listen to me. Then people won't. They see that you're battling with what it is that you're trying to deliver in your conversations, or in your leadership, or let's sometimes say in your management style.
I guess it's that idea of the self-fulfilling prophecy, where you're creating that space, and then of course you'll fill it with those expectations that you bring.
And even this evening, at about 20 to 7, I just became a little panicked. I'm like, oh my goodness, I'm going to be on this thing. I know we not practice, but I know we had a bit of prep for this. Not practice. We prepped as you should for this type of thing. But that narrative came on. It's like, oh my goodness, are you ready for this? Will you be able to say the right? It's my little cue to go, man. Whatever you say this evening is whatever you were meant to say. And if it's something that doesn't land well, or it doesn't sound like the words of a great and experienced leader, then it means it's something I need to learn from it. Absolutely. And I'm not trying to show up as a great and experienced leader. So what is this conversation in my mind all about? I'm just here. I'm being Adelia because Jeanette asked me to be on the show. So go with that.
That's powerful. And I guess bringing whatever you are in that moment and trusting that that'll be what's needed. You mentioned just a second ago, the idea of cueing yourself. Yes. And I think of on Spotify, where you kind of cue the tracks that you'd like to play. You have what's up next, and you can kind of cue what you're anticipating you're going to be in the mood for in a song's time or 2 songs time. So how can we use that skill of cueing when we know we're heading into a situation that makes us nervous? We know we're headed into a situation where we're going to be feeling doubt, maybe a little bit of uncertainty. How do we cue or learn to cue ourselves with those empowering narratives rather than the doubtful ones? Like, that's such a powerful ability.
So life is either beautiful, or it's funny, or it's cruel, because it'll replay things for you over and over and over, just in a different shape, form, or scenario. And it's very important to go, has this happened to me before? Or you'll know intuitively this happened before. So okay, let the emotions have its way with you, have a little meltdown if you need to, but just look back if you like. The playlist is there. It's when you need to, it's when do you want to press the play button? And yes, there is a time when you're needing to build that playlist. And I suppose that's when you're looking for those inputs, you're reaching out to people. We spoke about the coaching, but once they're there, they never go away. It just is important to cue yourself rather than the playlist. For me anyway, when do I press play? When did I hear enough? When do I need to pause because I need to just process that a little bit for now? When do I need to press rewind or fast forward?
Back a little bit. That's powerful. How would you recommend that people learn? I'm going to take us to the question section now. So what are some of the practical ways? We have this question from Alma. What are some of the practical ways that we can make the switch from friendly to assertive when we are required without doubting or second guessing ourselves, or unintentionally damaging that relationship where we've kind of established that rapport? I guess this kind of takes us again to that cueing ability. Maybe one of the possible ways that we deal with that is to cue ourselves when we have that doubt of, how do I switch to remind ourselves that we can be both at the same time? I wonder what your answer would be to that question.
Sure. So I always, when I start a project, even if it's with the same team, I'll remind everybody, this is my personality. I smile possibly too much. I've always had people say, you greet everyone. Like when you walk, if I walk into the shop, into Pick and Place bar, I'll be inclined to be nodding my head all the time. It's nod, hi, even if I don't know you. So I'm aware of the fact that I am generally a friendly person. And I understand that it can be misleading for some people. When it comes to a work scenario, and I'm talking about a work scenario, I will disclose, I'll say, I am friendly. I like having a good time. I like laughing. But I do like to know that there's a space for this. I'd like to know that that it's okay for you to do the same.
Mm.
I don't manage people. I manage the inputs and I manage the outcomes in as far as possible. I know that's maybe it sounds a little weird, but and I'm now talking about the workplace, we deal with adults. There's no amount of managing that you need from another adult. When it comes to yourself, I don't believe that anyway. I just need somebody to guide me and steer me and say to me, oh, am I doing okay?
Yeah.
You know, am I on the right path? And so I don't go to work thinking I'm going to lead, let's say, the HR team, for example. Sorry, let me say it the other way. I'm not going to manage the team. No, I'm going to manage the outcomes for the day. And so you asked how I do that, how I make the switch from friendly to I suppose, assertive. And it's that. And I don't need to say that with a fist, you know, banging on this on the table or whatever the case is. It's just constant reminders, you know, let's laugh, let's have a good time, but let's go and get those, let's do our best in terms of getting those outputs. Yes.
Yeah, I guess that kind of highlights again the mindset shift. All it takes is shifting your mindset from I'm not managing people, I'm managing the outputs. I'm managing sort of the performance of this team. And that takes a lot of pressure, I guess, off of the interpersonal manner that you have with people, that it doesn't all come down to, you know, whether you're too friendly or too stern, or because you're not managing.
Yeah. And also, if you have, you know, ask people, if I need you to do something a little bit faster or a little bit more intentionally, how is it that you'd like me to hear me tell you that? You know, what is it that you'd like to hear from me? Because sometimes I'm going to need to have to give you some really hard feedback, either in the way that you are conducting yourself on a, you know, on a behavioral level, or otherwise just in the work that you're doing. But when we hit those hard moments, what is it that I can say to you that's going to help you listen up in the moment and just be open to it without having, you know, without breaking down, without getting terribly defensive, you know? How is it that you need me to tell you that?
Yeah, that's
and you know what? Even if you do all of that, you get to that moment, that very awkward moment, and you've got to tell somebody. It's never less awkward just because I made that little disclosure, or that little declaration, or I asked for permission. I just have to remind, okay, this is that moment we spoke about. You remember when I said I might have to give you the difficult feedback? Are you ready? And if you're not ready, come back and tell me when you're ready. When you're feeling stronger, because I need it to be strong, because the feedback, if it's quite a serious piece of feedback, I need you to be ready to receive that feedback, as well as I need to be ready to give it to you, you know?
Yeah, and that ties into what we talked about earlier too, just anticipating that discomfort. Let the emotions do what they will with you, but know that
absolutely,
it doesn't have to stop you from moving through that moment. Yeah, we have another question from our listeners. We have a question asking, was there a defining moment growing up that shaped your resilience?
Sure, I had lots of defining moments, I think. I think we all have. So I was telling the story about my, I suppose my earliest memories. Yeah, my parents were married and divorced to each other twice. So I can explain that now. So they were married, they had my older sister, then myself, then they were divorced for about 10 years, and then they remarried and they had my brother, and they stayed married for about 3 years and they got divorced again. So I can smile and laugh about it now. Back then, I can't even begin to explain to you how crazy it is in a house where people don't talk to each other. I don't know if, you know, in my situation anyway, it was a matter of, oh, Adelia, I made mashed potatoes and sausage. Ask your dad if you'd like peas and baked beans. And I'll be like, hey, Dad, do you want peas or baked beans? And I go back and I say, peas, please, not baked beans tonight. You know, so for me, that was so dramatic that I actually said, please, I want to go to the school up the road there to do drum, because I have drummies. It was a big fat lie. I wanted to go to that school because I had a boarding school. I wanted to be away from all of this craziness. So there was some of that. And interestingly, in my late teens, early 20s, even in my 30s, I was very sure of the fact that I am not scared by any of this. I'm not scarred. Look, I'm okay. But if you look, if I'm being really true with myself, then this very high level of being, or this level of being highly independent, I read somewhere, I don't have psychology in my background, but I read it somewhere that too can be perhaps a sign of trauma that you're dealing with or have dealt with. So, people celebrate being independent, horribly independent as a woman. The more independent you are, the more rounds of applause you get. And that really got me thinking around, oh my goodness, is this perhaps why I am like that? I love being independent. But there are times when you go, gosh, why are you doing this alone? What is the meaning and what is the sense of all of this? So there was that. And if you imagine your parents were married and divorced each other twice, you would have moved houses a few times. So when people ask where you're from, I'm like, it still happens to me. I'm 43 now. I still go,
here.
Yeah, I'm from a lot of places.
Which one do I play?
I'm from a lot of places.
Experience.
All in Cape Town and in South Africa, but I'm from a lot of places. So if anything, this stuff has taught me tolerance. And I remember saying, let's say adaptability. I remember saying not so long ago in a conversation with you that, high school being racial schools at the time, people now will tell me that, you're tolerant of this race and culture stuff. I'm like, no, I'm not tolerant. Tolerant is a decision you make for something that you don't enjoy. I love it. I love that people are different. I welcome it. And I don't want to get stuck in those horrible narratives. Yes, it's true. It's true. Our country's history is not to be diminished. But like, where does my history start?
Yeah. And it also to that story you said or the analogy you gave us of what are you putting on every day? If we want to move towards unity, then we have to put on the story of unity every day and live that out.
So I'm definitely not naive, and I don't want to, it's because I wasn't that hurt by the country's past. So I'm mindful not to, as I say, discount it or shrug it off, but in my reality, because that's where I need to focus on, what am I going to do with the stuff that I know?
You mentioned earlier that you've developed as a result of the way that you grew up, and thank you for sharing that as well, for being vulnerable with us and sharing your story. But you mentioned the impact of developing that independence. And I'm wondering, because I think this is something that a lot of people in leadership positions probably struggle with, is that habit of doing it all alone, of being the lonely leader who makes all the tough calls, who has all the tough, you've got to deliver the tough feedback, you've got to do all those difficult things that are often isolating. How have you managed that tendency within yourself as a woman in leadership positions to welcome help and to draw in a team and to rely on others? And how would you recommend that other leaders also kind of let go of a little bit of that loneliness and ask for help?
So I don't want to put it down to a number, but there's two sides that for me. So when I work with people or a project, whatever it is, I generally use this. I also got this from a project, by the way. I use the analogy of, well, here's a sheet of paper or a piece of paper. We all understand coloring and the coloring book from our childhood. I'll draw the teddy bear, whatever you do on the inside of the teddy bear, colors, shapes, whatever you want to make this thing pretty is up to you, as long as you stay within the framework. And then the others, sorry, Megan just asked me that question again, because there was a second thing.
Yeah, the question was how, when you have the tendency to lead independently and to do things on your own.
Yes. And be prepared for magic. When you say to people that I don't know everything, I really don't have all the answers. So when we get stuck for an answer, or when you get stuck for an answer, understand, or you need to understand something, or you need to know more of something, understand that it happens for me too. So let's just be okay with the fact that when we need the answers, we'll go look for it. And sometimes that happens during the process, and sometimes it needs to happen before. So I don't want to use the word consult, but that's really what it is, also something from project management. They speak about the RASI chart, the RASCI, R for responsible, A for accountable, S for support, C for consulted, and I for informed. So that S and the C part of the RASI chart is for me also something that it's also a framework that's got nothing to do with life really, but I went and took out. But if I know that I'm project planning something, and I know that I need to consult Megan, and I know I need to inform, let's say, Amo or Lorto, then why am I doing that at the end of the project? let me speak to them before or during and ask them, like, what are your expectations? What is it that you want? Because you're listed here as support and consult. So on what level and to what extent? Yeah.
And I guess that also is a great strategy because it immediately circumvents the desire to do it on your own.
Yes,
Like, I'll just run with this as long as I can. And then when I run into a barrier, then I'll reach out. If you reach out at the beginning of a project, really ensure that you're bringing people in right from the start. We have,
and I think your view, sorry.
Carry on.
I was just going to say, your view of yourself as whether it's a project leader or a manager, needs to be that our job is to do the things, just do the things, as you say, run along or whatever, march along to the sound of the drums. My job is to make sure that I'm taking those speed bumps out of the way for the team. And a lot of that has to do with consulting, going to find out from people what it is that's important, because you might think you have all the answers and then you'll be horribly or pleasantly surprised that you don't, So it is a lot of asking people, just talk, just have conversations. As I say, it changes the world. I see that you put that quote on LinkedIn, but I know I say it so often that it sounds almost unimportant, but I genuinely believe that, like, just have conversations.
Absolutely.
Start a topic. And I know for introverted people that might be difficult, but find a way that you feel safe and comfortable. Just pick somebody. In fact, I do that in the 36-day, 90-day. I say to people, the first 30 days or 60 days, pick anybody. So if we were an organization right now, and let's say Samantha, I can't see your picture, and that's okay, Samantha, but let's say Samantha was the new person joining, then I'd say pick anybody, Crispin, Amo, you've got Michelle, Jeanette, or Megan, or Karen. You get to choose the order in which you speak to the people, but do speak to them. Just be okay with having conversations.
I always find too, when you're speaking about something that you care about, that really helps to relieve some of the anxiety around it. I haven't met many people who, when they're speaking about something that they love, are at a loss for words. And
prepare for the conversations. I know it might freak people out. What do you mean I'm just going to go over and speak to Megan? Well, then I go find out one thing about Megan, either in your conversation or before your conversation, that you can make as as a conversation starter. I know those are the rules that we apply for networking, but it's, everybody's got loads and loads of things in common. We speak about this diversity thing, and a lot of people understand it to be that we're all so different. Diversity is complete opposite. It's actually talking about how common we are, how the same we are. So go and find something. Go and find something about one thing. It's not difficult to find. Now with the internet and Facebook, it's very easy. Go. I'm not saying go and stalk people, but all I'm trying to highlight is it's not difficult to find one or two things that you can have a conversation about if you're worried about talking about a work-related topic.
And like you say as well, often it's conversation that removes barriers. That's the thing that really breaks those barriers down, whether it's in a work situation where you have barriers to a project and can solve them by consulting someone, or whether it's in your own personal conversation. Really is.
I mean, we can look at what business does. Business, if you are honest about yourself as people in an organization, or the organization itself, when you don't know how to do something and you need it done, what do? You call a consultant.
Absolutely.
So why shouldn't life be like that?
Absolutely.
Organizations are little ecosystems. It's life itself. It has a lot. Well, yes, I think you get what I'm saying now.
Absolutely. We have one last question from the audience before we wrap this up, and it's from Michelle, and she asks, as a leader looking at your peers, what leadership qualities do you think are missing in today's leaders? That's a powerful question.
What leadership qualities are missing? I think we spoke about, Jeanette did a very beautiful piece on vulnerability and resilience. And I suppose the one biggest thing that I find was also the biggest lack, without digging too deep, is people are really scared they're scared about being vulnerable. It's really a scary thing. So that, for me, leadership across the board has such a huge impact. And I suppose for me, that really is the thing, that's So it's vulnerability, being okay with that, and then just being a whole lot more curious, you know. And then the third thing is, if you've arrived, if you feel you've arrived, or that there's nothing more you can learn from anyone else in the organization or the people reporting to you, I talk to this thing of remaining teachable, particularly if you have, or you're at expert level, specialist level of something, you really haven't arrived. And if you take that viewpoint that, yeah, there's nothing more that I can learn in this space or on this topic, then for me, that's red flag. It's downward spiral for you. It might not be a short, quick downward spiral, but it's going to hurt you, you know. So just, yeah, be teachable.
Yeah, that's powerful. Yeah, be vulnerable, be curious, be teachable.
Be teachable, yeah.
Yeah, that's a powerful trio.
Yeah.
Well, Adelia, I want to thank you for your time. Thank you for sharing all these powerful insights with us. And if you would like to connect with Adelia, you can find a link to her LinkedIn profile in the chat. You can also follow Boundless Wisdom on LinkedIn to stay up to date with our Leaders in Conversation and all the other great things we're getting up to.